Welcome to the Tourism AI podcast, where we explore the intersection of artificial intelligence in the tourism industry. Pretty excited actually about this week. We'll be diving into some stories from a conference I just attended, which was Inventures in Calgary. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Some fun, really fun stuff happened while I was there, including a conversation I had with a robot about how she could be used in tourism. Honestly, probably the surprising highlight for me was how much David Usher brought to the table. He did a big keynote presentation and talked about innovation and creativity and all these things, and then even sang some of his great songs, which was awesome. And yeah, so lots to talk about. I can't wait to dig in.
Nice, amazing. Well, it sounds like it was a great conference, Peter, but can you just tell us a little bit more about Inventures, what it is? Why do people want to go?
Yeah, so Inventures is a conference that's put on by Alberta Innovates. It's been going on for a few years now. This is my first time attending. It's a big conference. I don't know, there's probably 12 to 1,500 people there. And it was really looking not only just at artificial intelligence, it was really looking at innovation in general. And so there was a lot of different topics. AI obviously was dominant and prominent. Was a lot of people talking about that, but it's not really necessarily what it's all about. There was a lot of other topics, but generally speaking, there were presenters, workshops, keynotes, demonstrations, all showing really the latest in technology and really focused on creating partnerships, creating relationships. It was just a really great conference. I got to say, people were very open, very willing to talk. Everybody wanted to learn about each other. One of the great things they did at the conference actually was your name tag had a little QR code that actually would link to your own LinkedIn account. So
Oh,
really
cool.
easy to get connected to people. It was just sort of like scan my tag and now you got me on LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff. So very well done. I want to just make sure I give major kudos to Alberta Innovates for putting on really a banger of a conference that really nailed it, in my opinion, on many different fronts. It was really good.
That's awesome. It's nice to hear that the tech community is rallying together and kind of building on obviously new technologies, including artificial intelligence. So that's awesome. I
Yeah,
think,
before we get into some stories though,
yeah.
and sort of talking about specifics, I wanted to maybe make a couple of interesting observations. And observation number one was that first of all, Alberta Innovates and some of the University of Alberta and University of Calgary sort of AI and advanced technology programs. Really, it opened my eyes to just how advanced Alberta is when it comes to this technology. We are really doing some really awesome stuff, and we're really leading the charge. But my observation specifically for tourism is that I couldn't find a single workshop that was specifically about AI or advanced technology in tourism specifically. So I was a facilitator of one of the sessions. I was invited to come and participate, which was great. It was all about deepfakes. It was a really great session. But I was really, I would say, disappointed to not see tourism have more of a prominent role. So certainly my takeaway is we need to get tourism on the map. We need to get tourism into the discussion. And that's really what I was primarily there to do. And I will get into some conversations, but had some really exciting conversations and some possibilities of some projects that can come out of that. So next year, tourism folks, we are going to be at Inventures and we are going to be prominent. We're going to have workshops. We're going to have a place there.
Right on. I love that. I feel like Alberta is such a hub for tech and tourism. I think those are one of our, or two of our best industries. So for the two of them to unite and make things happen and moving and shaking, that would be great. I think so. Go, Peter, go. Repping the tourism industry next year. Awesome. I think we're all wanting to know more about this robot. Tell us about that. What was that like?
Yeah, yeah. So I had just an unbelievable opportunity around the robot. Her name is Ameca. So she is a robot that's created by a company out of the US called Engineered Arts. And really, she's a humanoid robot and she's got interesting facial expressions and she's got a full body and legs. She doesn't walk. And so what happened was, so she's on this kind of roller so she can roll around. There's also a version of her that's sort of like a just an upper body version that can sit on a desk, which is a little less expensive and pretty cool. So couple things they had basically as a major kind of lunch keynote presentation was a conversation with a robot. And so literally the Leo, who was director of US operations at Engineered Arts, was on stage sort of having a conversation with the robot, and then actually people from the audience were able to ask questions, and there was an interactive conversation with people from the audience actually asking the robot some questions. I was very fortunate because I was invited as a facilitator of a panel to also attend a dinner, and it was sort of like a last minute thing happened where Leo and his colleague were basically sort of swapped in because somebody had to leave as sort of the main guests for this dinner, and I was like, man, this is awesome. That's exactly who I wanted to connect with in this conference. And then I sat down and they sat right next to me. So I got to spend literally like 3 hours over a dinner talking to talking to the folks that made this robot, that designed this robot, that programmed this robot, really got an inside scoop on sort of how it all works. And what I'll say is like the robot is really impressive, but actually the technology is surprisingly not that complicated. I mean, it runs on ChatGPT 4.0 and it's literally how it runs. I mean, there's other technologies and other things that it runs on, but it literally is it's sort of a fairly simple, I thought. Technology, the girl who programs her was telling me that, they just create one prompt, that's her personality, and then she sort of responds based on that one prompt. So it was actually surprisingly simple from the AI perspective, I would just say. I mean, obviously the robot itself is not simple, it's very complicated, it moves, it looks very real, all this stuff. So that's really the wow factor. But yeah, it was really cool. And then I had the opportunity, which we'll post the video probably in our newsletter or maybe as part of this podcast, to actually have a one-on-one conversation with the robot myself. Asked her about her applications in tourism. So, please watch that video. And yeah, so it was pretty cool. And a couple of other things I'll say about the robot that I think people would be interested in here is that I don't know if these are exact numbers, but sort of roughly, it's about $300,000 to buy this robot. You can buy the sort of the sort of the upper part of the robot just without the legs or whatever for about $100,000. And really, she's already being deployed in other places around the world, in places like museums and anywhere where she would interact with people and answer questions. And so if I think about this version that's $100,000 from sort of the chest up version. Honestly, I think that the PR and marketing value that you would get out of having her in your exhibit or in your museum or in your tourism destination or your whatever, I think it's a steal. I think it's a bargain, honestly. Like it's not a very expensive price for I think the wow factor and the marketing factor that you get out of it. I think it would attract a lot of visitors, attract a lot of media. So my pitch to anybody listening in the tourism industry is consider Ameca for your tourism destination, for your museum, for your attraction, for your whatever. I think it could do some good things, and I think obviously it would help to put Canadian tourism on the map and from a technology perspective as well, which would be pretty awesome.
Nice. I think you've covered kind of the pros, if you will, and some of the use cases that people could use in terms of implementing technology like this in the tourism industry. Do you see any challenges that might?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that question. So first of all, I'll and again, this is a bit of inside knowledge because I had the conversation with the gal that actually sort of programs her or whatever, and she kind of answered things in a way they weren't expecting. And I would suggest even in kind of a little bit dark-ish ways. And so, for example, she was asked if she could use her legs, what would she do? She would go and be free and go and see the world on her own without her. I don't remember the word. I don't want to say the word captors, but maybe her captors or her inventors or something like that. But it was sort of like I would go off and be free. And I was actually sitting next to a former boss of mine. We were sitting together, and I sort of said, that makes me feel a little less comfortable, actually. And so, interestingly, when I was talking to the person that designed her or that programs her, what happened was that they had programmed her and tested her, and they've been working with her on ChatGPT 4. And then just recently, before this conference, they updated her to ChatGPT 4.0, and she behaved differently. And so they sort of, I guess, weren't expecting that a little bit to some extent. So I thought that was interesting, but a little bit of just fine tuning and she'd be good to go. But I think I mentioned that because they also talked about her in context of like agriculture as an example, and the person I was sitting next to was a guy from a rural community, and I said, how would she be received in your rural community? And it was like, I don't think she would. So my point is that I think that something like this is really awesome and interesting, but it needs to be deployed properly, and it needs to be marketed in a way, and it needs to be in the right place, in the right space, and you know what I mean? Because it's one of these things that it's pretty different, and it's sort of it looks right at you when it's talking, and it sort of looks like it's thinking, and it sort of has this, it feels like you're talking to a human, it responds, it whatever. And so like any new technology, you just sort of have to approach it with some caution and some thoughtfulness and position it properly in order for it to be well received. So I think tourism is a great space, a great opportunity, a great place. That's like the ideal place in my opinion.
Yeah.
right? And there are other places, and there are different kinds of robots, but yeah, I would just sort of be like, yeah, if you're going to deploy this, like obviously have a bit of a marketing plan, a bit of a PR plan, a bit of a communications plan around it, and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I think you've hit on two key things that we keep seeing routinely with artificial intelligence, no matter, how it's kind of displayed, if you will, or manifested.
Mhm.
And one is obviously people are still a little bit hesitant in terms of their reception across the board. That's ChatGPT, that's robots, that's you name it. People are still a little bit hesitant. So that's to be expected. The other thing that I will say too is another factor that I think we're seeing across the board is you cannot control what artificial intelligence is going to say. To a certain degree, you can kind of fine tune
Yes.
messaging, but we're obviously seeing that as well with these new generative AI snippets that Google's coming out with. Obviously,
Yeah.
that's having a huge impact on search engine optimization, which is what it is. But at the same time, if you're wanting to rank and be part of that GEAI snippet, then you can't really control what it's going to say about you.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point, Emily. At the end of the day, we're at a place with, sort of artificial intelligence where, OpenAI talks all the time about iterative deployment, right? They're deploying these things iteratively and they're improving them as they go, and they're right. And Google, and there's obviously this AI arms race going on where everybody's trying to, race to get the first stuff out. And so, yeah, it's not perfect. Nothing's perfect at this point. So that's not to say it's not going to get really close to perfect and it's not going to be amazing and awesome, but that's where we're at. And so these things are, yes, doing weird things and sort of making, sometimes people uncomfortable, not on purpose or whatever. And yeah, and I think like this sort of robot persona, I guess, or robot sort of body certainly adds an element of kind of interestingness to it that I think could make some people feel uncomfortable. And so again, I think it's really important to have a good communications plan. If you're going to bring something like this in, you have to sort of
Yeah.
prepare people and whatever, right? But I think again, from a marketing and PR perspective, I think it can pay for itself all day long, over and over again, because it would generate so much interest that people would want to come and see it, which is awesome, right? And it can really make your tourism destination busy as a result of just having the throw up there, right?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, as you said, we're still kind of working through those challenges and those quirks, but we're going to keep innovating as per Inventures and Alberta Innovates. So keep
Yeah,
after it. You just got to keep using the tools and providing all that feedback. So as we always
that's
say
right.
on here, try out your tools, try out your AI tools.
Try it. Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because at this conference, I had quite a few conversations with people about weird ways AI has been acting and weird things it's been doing. And like it was a kind of a theme that people talked about actually sort of in not in sessions, but sort of just in between sessions. And yeah, but that's okay, right? And I mean, obviously everybody at this conference was people who are quite interested in this, and so they were pretty open to it. But yeah, it's definitely something we're hearing more of, not less of, as these tools get more powerful and as different features start to come out. Again, they're not perfect, and so it just sort of it is what it is.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, on a very different note, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Lethbridge College and what they're doing with AR VR. I know or I understand they're looking at using these tools in terms of human resources. So just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about those technologies, what they're dreaming up there, what does that look like? And also, can you just give people a little bit of a background on what augmented reality versus virtual reality is?
Yeah, so I mean, really, I mean, virtual reality is more of, they actually had quite a few rooms where you can have these virtual reality sort of experiences where you put on the big goggles and the big glasses and you're actually like in this world and you're in a classroom and you're interacting and you can see the people. So I actually sat in some of these rooms and they had these huge labs where, they'd be like private lessons or like quiet lessons or whatever, where you're in your own little space and you're listening and you're interacting.
Cool.
So that's sort of a virtual reality, and then the augmented reality is maybe in a different form. So maybe you're not necessarily wearing the thing. Maybe it's in your computer. Maybe it's sort of so, right. And so it allows you to sort of maybe see something in sort of what we would call like a real life form, but it's not actually in real life, right? So I had some really great conversations with them. So the Lethbridge College had sort of a whole area where they were, and they had these labs with all these different demonstrations, and then they also had some folks there that were actively looking to partner with industry on some ideas.
Nice.
And so I kind of went up to them and I just said, this is really interesting. One of the things that I hear about a lot in tourism is that we need solutions to sort of HR and workplace issues. When, for example, when people are coming here as temporary foreign workers or as seasonal workers or whatever, wouldn't it be cool if there's a way to give them a bit better sense of what they're coming to, do some advanced training before they get here? Because obviously, if you get to Canada as a seasonal worker, it's pretty overwhelming. You're in a new place, you don't recognize anything, you don't, right? And so and both Lethbridge College and I got pretty excited about the idea of like, I think there's ways that we can basically create some tourism specific training programs with a few layers. So when I say a few layers, like maybe it's like one's like a very general, working in Canada,
Yeah.
things to know, support offices, how to work with the government, all these taxes, all, like that sort of just kind of standard working in Canada stuff. And then there might be some layer below that that's maybe working in this destination and all about the destination and all about whatever. And then there could be a third layer that's like working in this company, right? And so, I just think the concept of getting a whole bunch of advanced training and also being able to actually like see the place you're going to come visit and understand how far things are away from each other and understand sort of, right? Like just really kind of almost get this immersive experience of the place you're going to visit before you get there. I think it would make you feel one less anxious. Also, obviously, would allow you to do some training ahead of time, which would be really cool. And then that way, you get here and you have done some training, and so it's the training you do on the spot maybe is a little more like repetition of what you've already learned as opposed to like the fire hose the first time. So, anyways, long story short is I think there's lots of interesting opportunities, and so I've actually set up a meeting with them next week to talk further. And so, I mean, they have a process around industry partnerships and there's some funding that could be applied for and things like that. So, too early at this point to even say whether there's going to be anything coming out of it, but I'm eager to explore. I think that these are really good opportunities for the tourism industry in Canada. So I'll be also talking to tourism partners about this just to get some input and feedback so that when I go to these conversations, I can really understand where the need would be, what it would look like, what it could look like, how the industry can get behind it, that type of thing. Because obviously, if something's going to be created, it needs to be created for the industry and to the benefit of the industry. So to be determined, but I think it's really, really quite exciting. And I think there's, again, the one takeaway I will also take out of the conference in general is that there's a lot of funding available for innovation and for innovative kind of product development and things like that. And so I think there's a lot to be explored in that area. And so again, for me, working with individual businesses and helping them solve individual business problems, absolutely, all over it. But if there's some industry wide stuff that we can work on that'll help everybody, I mean, that's a big win and a big unlock for the whole industry. So that gets me pretty excited.
No doubt. I mean, there's obviously lots of use cases here for, as you've noted, HR training, that sort of thing, foreign workers, kind of bringing those folks in to keep selling for us. But also, I think there's a lot of use cases for tourists as well. I mean, I think when a lot of people are planning their trips, especially if they're going for an event, a sports event, a concert, something like that, they want to know how close their hotel is. They want to know what the destinations in the area are. What are the attractions that they can check out, and are they close to where they're staying? And I think there's, a ton of different use cases there for engaging tourists as well.
I think there really is, but again, I think there's a lot of exploration that needs to happen. But I think that, it's interesting because also just the technology is going to be moving so fast that, for example, AI phones where you can just video, let's just say you're from a different country and you can just like turn on your video camera and point it to the menu and it can translate it for you on live on the spot, and technology like that. I mean, I see AI being such an unlock for the tourism industry in general because it's going to make traveling so much easier for people.
Totally.
Just on the language side alone, right? All of a sudden, language is not a barrier anymore. All of a sudden, all these barriers go away. And that is very exciting. And so that makes it just a lot less intimidating to go travel to new places and to go explore things right? So I think it's kind of where we're going to be going into a pretty exciting age when it comes to tourism because of the AI unlocks that are coming. So we'll see how it all develops and where it all goes, but I think it's an exciting time.
No doubt. Before we move on, I just want to ask you one more question. Have they done any testing with real people who are in HR in terms of training purposes? Or are they still in those preliminary?
I don't know that question. I don't know the answer to that. So we didn't really get into, many of the things that they're actually doing. But I will say though, in general, that at this conference, sort of HR and training was a fairly big topic around sort of workforce related stuff and how AI can help with it and stuff like that. So, there's a lot of stuff even exciting in the education space, but it applies, I think, beyond education. So like AI apps that can do customized training based on the feedback it's getting from people and stuff like that. And, stuff that can help with neurodivergence and things like that. So there's a lot of really exciting innovation happening in general that isn't necessarily HR focused, but I think can then be applied to HR. And then there's also some HR related stuff that's pretty exciting.
Nice. That's kind of a nice segue because my next question is regarding Alberta Innovates. I understand they're doing some research and development involving artificial intelligence. Can you tell us what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, they're doing a lot. So, I mean, I think that, a couple things they do is obviously they do some workshops and some courses. I think they have some tools and communications kits and resources and things like that that people can sort of take advantage of. And then, obviously there's some coaching and support programs that they do to help innovate entrepreneurs and innovators with sort of product development and ideation and all those types of things. And obviously they have funding and support. So there's a huge mandate for them to support, projects and ideas. And so, they have, obviously they work with post-secondary researchers and students, they work with entrepreneurs, they work with companies, what they call partner organizations, collaborators, and government clients. So, that was really my big takeaway, is that just how much is going on in terms of the vastness of what they're sort of working on. And so, sometimes it's AI, or sometimes AI is just a small piece of some bigger innovation, right? So, it's all starting to fit together, kind of thing, right? And it's sort of really what it comes down to, in my opinion, though, is really just solving problems and solving business problems, right? And commercializing and being a leader, right? So, Alberta Innovates on their website, I think it says something along the lines of, maybe here I'll find it quickly, but essentially they want to be, the visible leader in innovation, right? Period.
Yeah.
In Canada and around, right? And so, so that's not nothing. And again, I learned in this conference that they really are
Right.
quite a leader. And some of the universities that we have in Alberta are very leading edge in terms of some of the work they're doing. So yeah, so I think there's just a whole bunch of things they do and ways they can help and money they have available, to really help innovate. And that's what they're called, Alberta Innovates, and
Yeah.
that's what they're here to do.
So if just based on that note alone, would you recommend that tourism industry folks work with Alberta Innovates if they're looking for funding on some of these projects and implementation?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there are quite a bit of funding opportunities, and so yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to be now, as a result of this, spending a lot of my time just understanding, kind of what that could look like, right? So again, for me, it's sort of like, I think it would make sense for Alberta Innovates. I don't know their mandate specifically in terms of who they fund and how they decide, but obviously anything that would like impact the whole industry would be beneficial. Anything that would help make Alberta more innovative in general would be more official. So, or would be sort of fit the mandate. So, but they're sort of looking at initiatives, obviously artificial intelligence, clean resource technology. So, I sat with somebody from Alberta Innovates at lunch, who is sort of a person who's responsible for, sort of waste reduction and sort of that type of thing. And we started having a conversation around, just the fact that, she's like, oh, like we're in this space here, it's a convention center, and so, for example, like these containers that we have are all, recyclable and all this kind of stuff. And then I started talking about, well, wouldn't it be neat if AI can help us with a place like this convention center to, optimize the amount of food and reduce the amount of like actual waste that comes out of these conferences and things like that. And we had a great discussion about that. And she was like, I think there's a great project here, right? And so, because it's not just about sort of like doing something with the waste, but it's having less waste in the first place, right?
Yeah,
That's a huge opportunity for the tourism industry to save money, to reduce waste, to have a lower environmental footprint, and all the things, right? And then I was at another session where a guy who was an architect, he was talking about, actually interestingly, he was talking about Calgary's empty sort of office buildings and some ideas he had about vertical farming and having livable spaces with vertical farms. And he was like telling me about the research he did on how like one office, like half an office building, I think he said, you can vertical farm in that office building and basically produce enough like produce to feed all of downtown Calgary. And he was saying, I think he said something like, he blew my mind. I don't remember the number, but he like talked about the carbon footprint of like one pineapple making it to Calgary.
Yeah.
It was like, it was obnoxious.
Yeah.
And he was like, we can grow pineapples in Calgary. if we just like think differently or whatever, right? And so again, like there's just so many cool ideas that came out of that. And just think about that from a tourism perspective. It's like not only can you, first of all, have much less expensive, you can have much less environmental impact, and you can turn it into tourism experience. Like it's like it could hit check all the boxes all in one sort of one project, right? And so I mean I certainly got excited about that. So those are just some examples of the types of things that they're interested in sort of like supporting. And so I think the future really is very exciting. I think the world that we have been living in for the last while is about to go into such a disruptive place, and we're going to just see some amazing things happen. If all these innovations, honestly, if a tenth of these innovations can actually happen, it's going to be pretty exciting.
I think that's amazing. It's wonderful to hear that. I feel like we're living in one of those uncertain times where we don't really know what's coming next. Maybe it's the Gen Z in me, but I'm feeling a little nervous about what the future looks like. But to hear that, we're taking some of these tools, these new technologies, and turning them into really innovative, interesting, valuable things it's really heartening. So thank you for sharing that, Peter.
It is really hard. Yeah, I agree. I think one can look at what's going on in the world and be pretty scared and pessimistic. And one can also go to a conference like this and leave pretty engaged and pretty like excited about the future. And so, we talk about what's going to happen to jobs. We talk about all this kind of stuff. And, in a conference like this, you really have a lot of really good conversations with people, just about sort of the reality of where AI is and sort of the perception versus, the sort of the stories that are out there and how far we actually are from that. And actually, I think that, you listen to all these innovations and these stories and all these things that are happening, and it just makes you feel like, man, there's going to be so many jobs. It's going to be like a boom here in terms of opportunity, right? And so I would encourage people at the very least to go to these conferences and just go and listen. One of the best conversations I had was actually with a retired couple. And they were an elderly couple, and they were sort of there, and I sat next to them at lunch, and I was like, "Oh, like, what are you here for? And what are you what are your goals?" And they're like, we just keep hearing about this artificial intelligence and all this technology
Oh,
that's happening. We just wanted to learn more.
I
And
love.
I was like, that is what we need, right? Because you can live in fear, you can live in this sort of negative place about it, but you can come and actually get yourself educated. You can actually learn, and you can probably feel pretty invigorated. Like those guys, that couple felt very excited about the future, as
Aw.
did I. We had a great conversation about sort of the exciting future that's ahead and all the problems we might be able to solve if we collectively work together, right? And so I think exposure is really important, right? And back to Ameca too, right? Yeah, it might be something that's a little weird at first, but spend a few minutes with her and you're like, okay, little exposure is a good thing, right? This is all good, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I'll bring it over to pop culture for just a second. If you've seen
Okay.
Ted Lasso, there's a phenomenal episode essentially where he says this iconic line, be curious, not judgmental. And essentially he's just saying before you, make any assumptions about things that you may know very little about, be curious, ask questions, learn more, think
Yeah.
things through, kind of take a peek at what's going on before you make those assessments of what's coming. And I think that's a good reminder for me too. Anyway, highly recommend Ted Lasso. Check it out if you haven't. It's a great show. And be curious, not judgmental.
For sure. I like that message for sure.
Yeah, Peter, was there anything else that really stood out to you at Inventures that you want to highlight before we wrap it up?
The other thing I'll just mention that really stood out to me is just how many students were there and how many young people were there. There was sort of I made this comment to a friend of mine there. I was like, you sort of have this like very, very young crowd and then sort of like a 40-ish to 50-ish whatever crowd, like a mix, right? But there was a lot of students there. There was a lot of really young, bright people there. And I had some conversations with some really bright people who were just there to learn, just there to absorb. Obviously, the universities funded some of them to come. There was probably some, ways that they got there through schools and stuff like that. But it was for me, very encouraging to talk to some of these young kids and to just hear their stories and hear what they're working on and hear what they're excited about. And, again, like, back to your comment about sort of judging or whatever, it's like we often judge, Gen Zs and all this kind of stuff in these younger generations. And honestly, I think that we have a really awesome generation coming up that we should be proud of, and that and that we should celebrate, and that we should encourage and we should work with. And so, my takeaway was I met a bunch of really young awesome kids that have really cool ambitions and good plans that I look forward to keeping in touch with and seeing how we can put them to work for us to help the tourism industry. Like honestly, and like, these kids are really, really smart, really capable, really bright, and really motivated. So, again, we hear all these stories about laziness and about this and about that, and I just did not see that at this conference. And so I think that for many different reasons, the future is bright. And, as much as technology is going to brighten up our days in some ways, I think this young generation is really something else. So
Right on. What a nice note to end on. Thanks so much, Peter, for telling us a little bit about your experience at Inventures, how, we can kind of get things rolling in the tourism industry with new tech, new artificial intelligence tools. We've said it before and we'll say it again. Go try them out, go test things, look into some things that you don't know about yet. Be curious, not judgmental, and will subscribe to the podcast and check us out on tourismainetwork.com.
for sure. And I'll just maybe leave a final note. If you're interested in Ameca for your tourism destination or your whatever, get in touch with me. I've made a contact with the main guy that you want to talk to. So happy to put you in touch and get you going. I have no commercial interest in it at all, but I'd love to see Ameca come to Canada and make a bit of a splash. So
very cool. Awesome. Thanks, Peter. And we'll catch you next week.
sounds good. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Tourism AI podcast. To learn more about the network or get involved, visit our website at tourismainetwork.com or find us on socials at Tourism AI Network. We'll see you there.